I have now spent, in my time at NAIS, I've spent time talking with, working with, collaborating with, getting in the weeds with, rolling up sleeves with about 250 schools. And those conversations have been fascinating for me. And what I've been particularly interested in is, what do schools that are going from what I call nose down to nose up, what do those schools have in common? And the number one thing that I've seen is momentum, right? Those schools are able to create and sustain momentum. And so we're going to talk a lot about frameworks today, about what do they do and how do they do it and what does it look like, but a lot of it, at the core of it, is that notion of their own brand of that momentum. And so I end up, if many of you have seen me speak before, I've talked about this mountain concept, right? And the mountain is always evolving. The mountain is like this thing that I live on, and it's always changing. But it begins in this place I call Nowtown. Your Nowtown is your current reality. Your Nowtown is school today. And there's an imperative for all of us to move out of Nowtown, right? To get beyond that. And one of the things we'll talk about today is that one of the things that these schools are really good at is they've come to the understanding that you can't carry a house up a hill. That in order for us to move, one of the things we have to be able to do is we've got to be able to let some things go. And so one of the challenges we'll be talking about today is, how do we go about doing that? We also have to understand where we're going, right? This vision of what kind of school we want to be is going to be key to this conversation as well. So what we're going to do first is we're going to look through our time together. Our hour and 15 minutes today together is all about looking through lenses, taking some different frameworks that we're going to study and pull apart and be curious about. The first one is something new that I've been thinking a lot about, called the Four Quadrants. How many of you have ever done a SWOT analysis? So yeah, that's why I said there has to be something else. There has to be another way of doing this work. I cannot bear to do another SWOT with another board. And so I thought, what is it that I really want to spend some time thinking about? And so in the mountain, one of the things that I think is really important once you understand that you need to leave your Nowtown, is you've got to find your base camp. And your base camp is, who are you fundamentally as a school? Why do you exist? What is at the absolute core, and how are you different? Understanding that base camp creates your foundation. It's the thing you come back to when you begin innovating. And so what the Four Quadrants is about, in my mind, is establishing your base camp. It's a tool that you can use in your school to hopefully help you get there. And so the Four Quadrants begins with your DNA. So you can imagine you might do this exercise with your faculty. You could do this exercise with your board. You could do it with your students. You could do it with parents. You could do it with all kinds of people. But it begins, imagine a group of people thinking about the DNA of your school. The way I refer to that is I say, what is at the heart of your school? What is bigger than everyone? The DNA concept emerged for me when I had the pleasure of working with a school in San Francisco. And when I was working with that school, a 30-year-old K-8 school, they had the privilege of that board meeting bringing their founders back to the school. A husband and wife that started the school with a few other people, they brought them back and they told the story of when the school was created. And the board members who were there got to hear that story, and they got to feel it, and they got to know what was in the room when the school was created. DNA is about tapping into what was there when your school was a startup in a church basement somewhere? What was there in its founding? What was there that drove its creation? And what's there today that's bigger than everyone? What would you close before you would give up, right? What are those things that are unique? You say, we would close before we would give this up. So that is your first challenge in the first quadrant, is to spend the time figuring that out. And then you have to come to the reality to say, what assets does our DNA drive? What are those things that we have here that are unique that we can leverage for the future? That could be your physical plant. It could be your unique program. It could be your faculty. It could be your traditions. But the thing about assets is you've got to talk about them in a way that gets really detailed. If you're talking about your assets of your faculty, what specifically is it about your faculty that's unique? There's a school I was working with in Seattle that when they talk about their assets, they talk about the table where their faculty sit and eat lunch. Now, this is a little K5 in the middle of Seattle. This is not a fancy place at all. And this table they're talking about is like this old wooden table, right? There's nothing fancy about it. But I've had the privilege of eating lunch at that table, and it's a magical experience. The relationship between those people, those faculty, how they know each other, how they exchange, how they trust, how they cover for each other, it's unbelievable. And so for them, one of their greatest assets is literally and metaphorically that table. And so the assets exercise is about finding what is your thing. And often it's connected to your DNA. Not always, but often it is. Your assets are an expression of your DNA. And so once you've figured out what your assets are, your third quadrant is what are your headwinds. Now, one of the things that's been really striking to me since I've been doing this work around my four quadrants is that the headwinds, often, many of them, if we're honest with ourselves, often come from our DNA. Yeah, our headwinds are things like the external market and the age of families and how many children there are and how much our school costs and how far away our busing and our lunches and all that. Those are definitely headwinds. But also when we look in our DNA, right? This is Atul Gawande in the book Being Mortal said, culture strangles innovation in the crib, right? That's when the aspects of our DNA are actually potentially serving as a headwind. They're inhibiting our ability to move forward. Now, all your headwinds are not all derived from your DNA. But my sense is that too often in our schools, particularly schools that have been around for a long time, we aren't as conscious about thinking about the things that maybe we love, but also might inhibit us moving forward. And so headwinds is about the forces. It's about the things that are going to hold you back. In a systems thinking approach, they'd often be called noise. If your school is a system, headwinds are the things that are going to slow your system. They're going to create friction. They're going to make it harder for you to realize your DNA and live into the potential of your assets. And then once you have all that figured out, your last category is strategic innovation. Where are you going to go and how are you going to get there? What is your future? It's not about who are we, because that's your DNA. It's about where do we want to go. That's your future direction. And so for me, I went into this exercise because I was sick and tired of doing SWOT, but I actually like where it's taking us. And the work I've done with schools, this is revealing some really interesting conversations. And so I would offer this up to you as something that you might want to think about doing. And I'm going to offer it up to you in this immediate time, just with the people around you. Introduce yourself and talk a little bit about these 4 quadrants and talk about how they resonate with you. And if you're interested and you have other ideas, I'd love to if anybody wants to share any ideas after the session with me, I'd love to hear them, because I'm inventing this thing as we go. So I'm literally making it up as we move forward. So I'm not suggesting for a moment that it's perfect. But just talk about it at your table. So here's the thing. The 4 quadrants creates the space for you to start thinking about your base camp. You start thinking about leaving your now town, leaving your current reality, going on this innovation journey. You need to figure out who you are, and part of your base camp is figuring that out. The other thing I need is, I don't like the name the 4 quadrants, and I can't think of anything else. So if you're creative that way and you come up with something, I would love a new name, and I'd be happy to attribute it to anyone who comes up with it.
SWOT analysis.
No, not that. So the other thing is, the other one I want to have you think about a little bit is, this is an older book. I don't know how old it is. I probably could find out. This is called The 3-Box Solution. It's by 2 Dartmouth Business School professors, and it's now found its way back to the top of my pile. And I'm reading again, and it makes me think about base camp, and it makes me think about that notion of clarity and this notion of beginning to do some innovation design. And the notion about the 3-box solution is that as school leaders, we've got to be working 3 boxes at the same time. This is that whole notion of we have to reimagine the plane while we're flying it. The first box, what's called box 1, is this innovation around optimizing your current performance, doing school even better, doing what we do on a daily basis even better, right? That's box 1. Box 1 is about how do we create what often is referred to as sustaining innovations, right? We get better and better at doing the thing we do every day. And that's super important. We run schools every day. That's what we should be getting really good at. But we also know when we look into a bold future, like the one I was talking about earlier today, that it by itself isn't going to do it. And so what they spend a lot of time in this book talking about is box 2, which is forget the past. Now what that means is we have to forget the practices that fuel the current school, that fuel the current practice, and are not aligned with the future. So it's not that we forget everything. It's not that what we're doing in our schools isn't magical and special and deeply important. But there are some things we do that are not aligned with what we think our future will be. And those are some of the things we have to have the courage to forget. And what he talks about in the book, or what they talk about in the book, is that if we don't have the capacity, knowledge, courage to actually forget some of these things as we look forward, we're not going to be able to get to box 3. And box 3 is about creating the future. And box 3, the way you do it is nonlinear, right? The way you invent the future is by rapid innovation, small bets. Jim Collins calls them shoot bullets before you shoot cannonballs, right? Really quick innovation, really quick ideas. Mike Cobb, who spoke last night, when he was talking about his little farm, right? And he started out super small and then put a little more in, put a little more in. That was inventing the future. That was creating that third box. That was working on a new playing field. As a school, one of the best examples I have of a school that I think is figuring out how to do box 3 well is Wichenden School, a boarding school in Massachusetts. And Wichenden, over the last, I would say 10 years, the board, John Kearney, who's their head of school, and their board spent a lot of time clarifying their base camp. And their base camp was fundamentally, they figured out who is the Wichenden student. Who do we serve really well? And they figured out that Wichenden student was kind of an underengaged kid who needs some extra support, maybe a little bit of a learning difference issue, maybe a little bit of an issue around making friends, maybe made some poor decisions in their life. But they're like, that's our kid. That's who we work really well with. And once they figured that out, they started doing box 1 on that. They started getting better and better and better and better at doing it. And in that process, there were some things they had to stop doing. They had to stop trying to compete with Exeter for Exeter kids. And they had to say, we're going to go after these kids. And then their box 3 was, they said, the board and John said one day, why is it that we think the only place we can serve Wichenden kids is on the Wichenden campus, a boarding school in rural Massachusetts? And so what they ended up doing was taking and creating a new Wichenden school, a satellite campus above a child development center in Brooklyn, New York. And so now there's Wichenden School serving 50 students in Brooklyn, New York. They're Wichenden students in the same way that the Wichenden students are Wichenden students on the campus in Massachusetts. And what's also interesting is that creating that school has forced them to learn how to tell their story even better. And the other thing that they didn't expect is that between the campus in Brooklyn and the campus in Massachusetts, they now have 1 year after starting the campus in Brooklyn, they have the largest enrollment in the school's history. They also, strangely, have never seen in like the last 25 years more applications to the boarding school. Because that story, that clarifying, that getting really specific about what they do has resonated. People are talking to other people, and they want to know more about what the school is doing, right? So that's a situation where box 3, some new idea that really opened them up, created the context for them to fully live into their DNA, right? That's the piece about it that I think is so fascinating. We think about these 3 boxes. And we think about, so in our schools, what we have to think about is who is in charge of box 1? Who's doing that work of always getting better? Who's in charge of box 2? Who's helping us forget the past, thinking about the things we need to forget? And who's in charge of box 3? Who has the space, time, focus, resources to try some small bets that are oriented around the future, right? This book, what I also love about it is it's really easy to read, and it resonates, I think, with school leaders. So I offer that to you as something to think about. When I put it on the mountain, what I look at, when I put the 3 boxes on the mountain, I see that box 1 is about making Nowtown a lot better, right? Box 1 is about small things we can be doing. We'll talk in a few minutes about Kaizen. Small things we can be doing to make our schools better. Box 2 is all about fully understanding our base camp and understanding what are we not going to take with us as we wander up the mountain. As we become tent dwellers and not house dwellers, and we take on a posture of continuous movement, what is it that we're going to leave behind? And then box 3 is all about that bold vision for the future. What do we want to be? Where do we want to go? And how are we going to get there? The other thing I wanted to just take a moment to think about with this, as we look at our understanding our base camp and understanding who we are and how we work, I wanted to take a moment and look at some of the work we've been doing at NAIS around parents. I'm not going to get into the parents' jobs here specifically, but I am really interested in this concept of the four forces. And when we did jobs research, and we still are doing a lot more research in this area, we did the why parents hire independent schools. Now we're doing what jobs do donors, major donors have? What jobs do major donors have when they hire a gift? And then we also are doing what jobs do teachers have when they hire a school? And so this research is fascinating for me and for the NAIS staff. But what we're finding is that when someone makes a decision to enroll in a school, there are really four forces that are acting on them. The push force is, what is it that's causing me to say, I've got to get out of the school I'm in? The educational environment I'm in is not working. The pull is, what is it about the school that I'm looking at that's magnetic? What's attracting me? What are those things that are making me want to go? And those two forces, what is pushing me out of my current context and what is pulling me into the new school, create all the energy to make a switch from one school to another. The same thing is true if you're buying a car. The same thing is true of a lot of things. And those forces are not just functional, what programs a school offers, what their tuition is, etc., but also are social. What does it say about me when I have my kids at this school? And they are emotional. How do I feel about this decision? And social and emotional is just as powerful as functional. But when we look at those forces, when we look at the school, when we look at the new solution, the things I worry about related to the new solution are anxieties. Will this school actually be able to meet the needs of my child? Will I, as a parent, fit into this community? Can I afford it? What does it say about me? What are my neighbors going to say if they know that I'm enrolling my child in this school? Right? Those anxieties about the new solution are real. And then when I look at the situation that I'm going to give up, there's what's holding me back from giving it up? What are the trade-offs that I'm going to have to make if I leave that school? That force is called the habits, right? The bus just picks my kid up at the end of the street. They've got friends on the soccer team that go to the school with them. There's all kinds of habits that somebody has to give up. And when someone makes a shift from one school to another, it's simple mathematics. If pushes and pulls, the sum of push and pull does not exceed the sum of anxiety and habit, a switch does not happen. And if it does, it happens. And what's interesting to me is I read strategic plans for fun. I collect them like baseball cards, and I read them and I look at them, and you would not be surprised how similar they are, as I'm sure you know. They're kind of like mission statements that way. But one of the things I find really interesting is when strategic plans are talking about innovation, and they're talking about moving forward, and they're talking about investment, which of the four forces are strategic plans generally investing in? They invest in pull. Most strategic plans are pull-based plans. We are going to make our school even more magnetic to people. They come from a supply-side perspective. They come from this notion that we're going to sell this thing and make it even more attractive. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Increasing pull is a great way to increase that top-line product. But what I don't see schools doing enough is what I call anxiety-reducing innovation. What are the anxieties that families have that are holding them back from joining our communities? And how can we innovate around that? What can we be doing in our school community to create less friction for entering in. And these could be small things. These could be things related to the admissions process itself. They could be a whole host of things, but I don't think we spend enough time knowing and understanding what are the anxieties and how we can reduce them. So I want to give you another rinse break with your colleagues on two concepts. One, the 3 boxes, and 2, the 4 forces. Just talk about those a little bit and how, if you understood what are the forces that are acting in your school, what are the pushes that are driving people to your community, what are the real pulls, that the reasons they're choosing you over another school, what are their anxieties, and what are their habits? Go ahead and talk about that for a few minutes.
That's what I was